Hello and welcome to the joys of classic gaming. Wires will always be a problem for any electronic device, but for older video game consoles in particular, like the NES, Segas, PlayStations, and even the GameCube, you're going to have a lot more of them to deal with for the controllers. And when they're in use, they're not that bad. At least if you're not worried about the tripping hazard. No, the issue comes in when you're done playing and you need to store them. No matter how neatly I've tried to keep these cables clean, they usually come out of my storage cube as a complete and utter rat's nest. Which got me thinking, I have a 3D printer, and filament and wires are typically stored in spools, so could I make a wire spool for video game consoles? And the answer to that question is yes. Recently, I've made a new wire spool for my GameCube controllers, and today I thought it'd be fun to show you how we go about designing them. The basic design of our controller spools, like the one for our NES, is pretty simple. It comes in two parts, one part for holding the controller and the other part for spooling the wire and storing the plug. And a good spool is a balance between the top controller half and the spool bottom half, which is why the first step for any controller spool is actually to map out the controller in CAD software. And once I do have something that is roughly the shape of a GameCube controller, it's time for me to stop working on the actual controller spool and start working on the icon. You see, as a way to keep our products in line, figuring out which plastic bits belong to what other plastic bits, I put many things like icons and text that's embossed and embedded into the plastic itself and the design files. And the GameCube controller is no different, which is why I'm taking the profile that I made for my GameCube controller and turning it into an icon by just adding in some of the GameCube's buttons and features into the icon's design. Now that the icon is done, I can now actually start working on the controller holder. The design is simple at first, just a rounded box with a constant radius around critical points, then emboss the controller's profile into it. Since I don't need that much plastic, I can cut away at the bits I don't need and smooth it out so it looks halfway decent. And with the rough design done and a 4-hour print later, I have myself a prototype. Now, doesn't look like a good match. That is until you actually look at this dead on and you realize that, oh yeah, that's pretty bang on if this is to the top. The thing you don't want to point out is, it's not really holding itself in good. A little too off for me to get a lot of good data outside of the directly touching bits. The other bit is I went a little too nuts on the cutting, so that's what the next design fixed. Oh my god, this is worse. I mean, I like the way this prototype looks, especially with the open vent on the front, but oh god, I went too tight on this one. And you can really see how the impact of a low infill percentage does to this. I really have to go back to my normal infills with the final production. So, prototype number 2 is a failure. Prototype number 3. New dimensions, new whatevers, and I like it. I mean, tight, really tight. But that's just, figuring out the offset. And from the feels of it, and the fact that it's rubbing against these walls, you can feel it when it's going in. It's this side. It just needs to be widened a little bit that way. And that's what I did with the next design to the fourth prototype. Now, I was pretty happy with the way the third prototype went. So with this one, I decided to add a bit of a groove on the inside, like I do with the DualShock controllers. As inside, you're going to see a lot of cut marks. That's because I had a rim that stuck out. Because the idea was, when you put your GameCube controller into the spool, I thought if I put extra plastic here to kind of pin it down, maybe hold down the controller by the tips of its feet, so that when the controller gets placed in, it doesn't just fling upwards because of it. But I didn't know if I was going to have enough material on the top, which is why with this one I tried. That's why if you look on the inside, you can see the cuts, because evidently it didn't work. So I cut those out because I'm like, okay, that failed. That failed. Shape's, pretty much the same as the last one, but this time, look, this fits like a glove. But that brings up a bit of a question. Two questions to be specific. One, how in the hell am I going to actually hold this thing into the spool? The second question I need to ask is, where do I cut? So I put these black marks onto the controller holder to figure out where the bits that actually need to be sunken into the case are, and so that I can go and start mapping out where screw holes and all that need to go. And that results in prototype numero 5. And you can kind of see what I did. I put screws holes in, so I can go and test out these guys. But you may be noticing, well, what's this? Mr. Tower goes here. So, I'll put controller in, I'll show you the problem. Problem is, even this is the final thickness. This is 18 millimeters, and if you look, there's no place to clamp. I can't clamp this. No matter what I do, I cannot clamp this. So I have to hold this down somehow, and I thought, you know what? Something here that will just hold it in place, which got me to this design, where we have a telescoping branch that goes in between curves. I'm starting to finalize the shape too. I really like the curves so that you can kind of see through it. But once I put this in, it doesn't work. Actually, it's off by a considerable amount. However, as I was toying around with this, I lifted it. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's holding. I mean, it needs to be bigger here, but, let me grab this piece, let me put this here, and let me just, and that was all I needed, because now, pull on the wire, sorry, now when I pull on Mr. Wire, it doesn't want to go. It's forcing. So one, revise this. Bam. Now, wider. And two, now that it's wider, let's go and try our little bit again. And when we try our little bit again, she ain't going anywhere. So that was sort of how I did it. So I figured out this thickness, and I'm like, okay, we make this from an innie to an outie, and then we go from there. So if I can get this, it will be the final revision, which it is. As you can see, that controller is not going to go anywhere once it's put back into there. Best bit is I have prototype legs, which means I can, with some screws, I can go put this down, screw this all together, and I can go and do a test fit to see how well the back does. And it's brilliant. This whole thing just works. And all that's left for me to do is clean up this giant pile of plastic that's now accumulated on my desk and make the final controller spool. So, what does that entail? This PLA. This is made out of PETG and GameCube controller icons, and put it into every part that needs it. And then from there, well, I just slot the controller down. I made the channel on the back big enough for a thumb, so that way you can just plant your thumb on the back of this. And then, you know, you wrap it a few times around. And what you're left with is one little controller spool. And the end result is this. And I am so pleased with how this turned out. Not only is this giving a much needed splash of color to my existing game console media cabinet, it also is so practical. My wires are now nicely, neatly, and conveniently wrapped up, and it holds pretty well vertically. So if you wanted to buy this, you just need to go and you can pretty much tape this, well, not really tape this, hook this onto a side of a bookshelf or a wall, and she'll just hang there until you want to lift it out. The only regret that I do have for this is the fact that I did have to use a lot of extra materials to hold the controller down, which greatly not only influenced its price, but also impacted its shipping. As a result, I had to do some number crunching and some funny discounts to make this controller as price competitive as I was willing to do it. Which means that for the first time, you're going to see bulk discounts on 1 to 4 controllers. But in spite of that, I am very satisfied with this controller spool. And if you'd like one too, they are available now on 16bitstore.com or our Etsy and eBay stores. You will find the links for those in the description below. But anyways, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope this video was informative. I hope you have yourself a good day, and as always, take care.